video, I want to talk about some of the different mindsets between practicing and performing. You know, when you're in the practice room, is that mindset, are those goals different than in the performance space, right? What things do they have in common? You know, when people say there's a difference, or when people say they should be the same, what do they mean, okay? Because this used to be pretty confusing to me, because I would hear people say different things, and I would think, what do they mean? So I want to kind of iron that out, and I think it applies to you in terms of what your mindset is, so I want to talk about that. But then I want to, you know, as I usually try to do, I want to connect it to a few other bigger, more encompassing concepts. The main one being something that I made a video about a while back, and I'll put the link in the description if you want to know why it is I believe this. It has to do with something that happened to me that instilled this belief in me, basically. But I believe that every time we play music, we have the opportunity, the potential to change somebody's life. Because we never know who's going to hear it. We never know what they're going through in their life. We never know what they need to hear. So that possibility is always there. And so we should seize it. Seize it by putting as much into what we do as we can. Then let it go, because you can't make that happen, right? But sometimes you have people come along and they are open to an effect like that, whether they know it or not. And that is something I continue to experience from both sides, continuously. Sometimes I'm the changer, sometimes I'm the changee. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. So performance mindset versus practice mindset, you know. I remember one time I went to visit one of my sisters, and her and her husband, they have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. So we go down there, we eat dinner, and then we go outside and we're playing baseball in their side yard, just throwing the ball around, hitting it, whatever. Kind of having fun, messing around. That's what I was doing, right? All of a sudden, my nephew's dad starts screaming at him and saying, do it right, do it like your coach says, and all this stuff. And I was just like, whoa, I didn't know we were doing all that. I thought we were just kind of having fun, right? But that was where that he was coming from, right? So, just a kind of a funny example of 2 different perspectives you may be coming from when you're thinking about performance. You know, is it something that's more casual to you, that you want to have fun with, but do a good job, you know, learn some things? Maybe you want to learn a piece for something. Maybe you're in school and you want to get credit for a guitar lesson course or a guitar class course, and so you're going to do a jury and then, you know, focus on your major after that or whatever. Is it something like that, or is it more like a long-term goal, long-term focus, continuing relationship with the instrument that's going to grow and change and get deeper and deeper, right? So I remember being an undergraduate and doing what I just talked about, doing a jury at the end of a semester for a guitar lesson course. And they gave us this sheet of paper with a bunch of advices for how to prepare for the jury. And it was stuff like, get a good night's sleep, you know, eat a balanced breakfast beforehand, don't play too fast. And I also remember on there something about it saying, you know, practice the way that you want to perform. So if you do something right in practice, or if you do it wrong in practice, you're also going to do it that way in performance. So practice the way you want to perform, right? So that's kind of the introductory, more casual type of approach, you know, relationship there. And I think this is important because I used to not realize that. I can remember not realizing that. At this time in my life, if I was practicing something and I screwed it up, I was likely to just think, well, when I'm performing that, I'll just get it and then just go on, right? So I remember feeling that way, and with this type of perspective, I think it's important to realize in this context, if you screw something up in practice, you most definitely will probably screw it up in performance, right? So make sure you get it right over and over in practice, and that will give you the best shot to get it right in performance. So I think that's true, and I think that applies to people with that type of relationship to the instrument. So you don't have the misunderstanding of, well, I messed this up, but I'll just get it right because I want to play my best in performance, so I'm going to, right? That is not the case, I would say, for most people, certainly including myself. So outside of that, if you have a deeper, more long-lasting relationship with the guitar, an evolving relationship, okay? When I hear these people talk about practice and performance, now they're talking about two very different things. And I've heard many great players say it in, you know, kind of their own words, but they all kind of say, this is practice, this is performance. They're not the same. When you practice, practice. When you perform, perform. And, you know, you don't do both at the same time, basically. My teacher used to say, when you practice, it's like going to the lab. You dissect things, you take them apart, and then you reassemble them on a higher level than they were when you took them apart. And then he said, when you perform, it's like letting the wild animal out of the cage. Which, if you were to hear him play, that would be a surprising comment because he played amazingly well. Everything is so under control, but that was his description of performance. You open the cage and you let the wild animal out, you're going to see what it does. And then he said, there's an element of performance that you will never recreate in your practice. He said it's just impossible. I heard another individual who's an amazing guitar player talk about this, and he said, yeah, when you practice, but when you perform, you perform. And they're very different. And then he started talking about people that practice with a mirror, okay? A common practice technique is play in front of a mirror. And then you can, you know, see all your movements, and you can teach yourself that way. Some very well-known guitarists, players, and teachers are known for doing that. It's obviously done a lot for them, okay? This guy was saying that's ridiculous. Like, he couldn't get over the fact about how ridiculous he thought this was. And at first I thought, why are you upset about this? But then he explained, and I thought, you actually have a good point. His point was, if you're practicing, or if you're playing in front of a mirror, you're practicing. He said, you can't play in front of a mirror. If you're looking at yourself, you're practicing. So he said, if you want to do that, videotape yourself. He said, then you can actually play, you can actually perform. Then you can look at it later and see how you performed. And when he said it that way, I thought, that's really interesting stuff. I mean, that's really deep level stuff. To me, that implies you're not going to be able to get in there in certain ways if you're still practicing. So if you're interested in seeing what that looks or feels or sounds like, make sure you perform. Then kind of look at it and analyze it, right? So I look at it like this, and it ties together a lot of stuff. But when you perform, it's who you are, you know, right here, right now. Especially if you're doing something like, you know, playing a solo guitar piece. You're not a member of a band, it's not a bunch of people. It's just all the attention's on you. It's just like, who are you, right? And what helps me in that moment the most is to focus on what I mentioned at the beginning of the video. You never know what type of effect your music can have on who's listening to you. Potentially it could change their lives. So that helps me get my priorities in place. I want to do the best I can. Even if the best I can do that day is not my kind of general based on an average best. I still want to do the best I can that day. I want to put as much into my music as possible in the areas that I think are the most important. And I don't want to do anything, I think this is big, I don't want to do anything to get in the way of the potential of the powerful effect of music. Okay. So that means, you know, you do your best and you accept it, okay? Now let me give you an example, because this happens to me all the time. So pretend I'm playing for you, you're teaching me a lesson, and I come in, hey, how's it going? How's your weekend? Whatever. What are you gonna play today, Chuck? And I'm like, well, I'm gonna play this piece. Been working on it all week, it's going really great. So I start to play the piece. I get this part right at home all the time, I promise. It's just like this finger here, just like, yeah, see. Oh, yeah, I mean, that, I always get that in practice, just, you know, let me go back. Okay. Okay, right? So you see what's happening there? I've run into that frequently. Or, you know, someone will play the piece and then at the end, it's just like, as soon as they finish, it's like the last chord. Well, that goes so much better at home, and you know, that one part I messed up, but like I didn't mess that up at all this week, and really, you know, my sound is usually better, and it's just like instant justification mode, okay? Now, I have total sympathy for this mindset because I used to do the same thing. But here's the thing about that. Usually I won't mention it because it's just, to me, it's just static that I have to tune out. It's basically irrelevant information. Like 95% of the time, you know. If someone is like, well, I busted a nail, so it's not there. Well, okay. I mean, I guess that's good to know because that finger's going to sound weird. But usually the justification, I don't need it. It doesn't help. I already know what I'm going to talk about. And like 98% of the time, it has nothing to do with any of the justifications. Because I realize some things are not the way that the player wants at that time, right? But here's a big disadvantage to that perspective. I think when you justify, there's two big things that I think that we're doing that I think we just need to quit. Just stop doing, just quit it. Not because they're bad or wrong, because they don't help. They don't help us with our goals. Two things. One is combining the worlds. If you're justifying by comparing yourself with how you sounded all week in your practice, you are not here now in the present being who you are. Okay? There's some hard truths about that. People like to use the word technique. Like, oh, I practice technique, or their technique is good, whatever. You know, what does technique mean? Well, you hear people give all kind of crazy explanations. Like, the craziest one I've heard is someone who said, he's extremely well known, and he was like, technique is when you have one move and you go from that move to a second move, and in between the two moves is a technique. And I'm just like, that is way too complicated. Like, I'm not gonna think that much. Technique is the way you play. Period. No further explanation needed. And that means everything. It's the way you move your fingers. It's your hand position. It's the way your arms are. It's the way your shoulders are. The way your back, your chest, your hips and your legs. The way you breathe. And the way you think. The way you think is part of your technique. If you're about to play a piece and you think, oh my God, I really hope I don't make mistakes, and I'm really scared I'm gonna make one, and I'm so nervous, and this person is just judging me hardcore, and here we go. That is way different than if you think, man, fuck all these people that are about to listen to me, and I'm just gonna do what I do every day. Okay. It's way different. It's part of your technique, right? If when you perform, things do not carry over, in my opinion, those things are not yet part of your technique. That is what that tells you. It's not that you don't carry over things from the practice world to the performance world. It's that they're either there or they are not. And you don't really know what it's going to take to cultivate it, to get it to go from this to this. You just have to find out. And it's a test. When I'm playing in this performance and I do something and I say, well, that just kind of came out. It's in my technique, okay? Technique is like the best friend that you may never have. It's like your best friend. It's always there for you. Like, are you nervous? Doesn't matter. Are you unsure? Doesn't matter. Did you flat out forget what comes next? Doesn't matter. Technique is there for you, right? And I theorize that people that perform really well, it's not that they never have any kind of lapse of memory. It's that if they do, well, they've only played that piece 8,000 times. Their hands compensate until you can get back on track. And I have experienced that exactly that way. It will save you if you flat out forget what comes next. If the piece is really firmly in your technique, okay? So that is what technique is. And whenever someone says, well, I always do this at home, but I screwed it up here, my response is, then it's not yet in your technique. So keep working until it is, right? So I think, it's hard to resist, and I've done this a lot, but at some point I realized it's just not beneficial. Take your lumps if you didn't play the way that you wanted, and focus on the now. And don't let a misstep affect the potential of what you're doing, right? Just forget about it, have that kind of selective amnesia, and move on, okay? And then I think that leads us into the second point, and then I want to say one more thing, just in case I haven't talked enough. But the second point is, if you do that, then, I know this isn't intentional, so like I said, I'm sympathetic to people that do this, but the reality of the situation is you are interfering with the potential that your music making can have on your listener. And I say this because this happens to me a lot. And it doesn't make me angry. It's just like static. I have to tune it out. I'm not going to pay attention to it. Like, someone wants to drag down their own performance, I can't not make them, but I'm not going to do it. Like, no, I'm not going to partake in that. So as a teacher, like, I train myself, okay? Focus on things that are going well. Put together some things that are kind of missing sometimes. Realize what people are working on and what they may or may not be able to do. And then you use that, when you're going to focus on kind of the next right thing to work on in the piece, right? But I'm not bothered by any of these things. I am looking to partake in this life-changing experience. I'm looking to partake in that experience like a ravaged, thirsty, slobbering dog. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who somebody thinks they are or thinks that they aren't. It doesn't matter how old someone is. I am looking for things, and I often find them. And I don't see any reason to say, well, this is not legitimate because of somebody's age or somebody's experience, or because they didn't even feel that way. So what I have learned being the performer is, don't take that away from somebody. Let's say you played a piece and they enjoyed one thing about it. Don't take that away by saying, I hear all these other things, right? We just have to let that kind of stuff go. If they're like me, it won't bother them anyway, but they'll just have to tune it out. But it is kind of, a foot in both worlds, and I think, to me, it makes sense you either want to be in one or the other. And you can use the information, if you perform and you record yourself, listen to it later, and then you can still critique and improve and all that kind of stuff, right? But I want to wrap this all up by making this point from my own life. When I got to the man that I call my teacher, Robert Guthrie, I already had 1 degree in music, and I had heard about him and I respected him a lot. I didn't know him at all. So for probably at least a couple of years, when I would play for him in his studio during lessons, that was the worst place that I played in the world. Like, it just really was. I was always so nervous. It was intimidating to me because, like, we're right close to each other. And I just would think things like, he's going to hear everything that you're doing, and he's just going to think you should be doing so much more. He's going to hear every mistake, and it was just so intimidating to me, right? So I would play very badly. Often I would play in lesson, really do badly. Later in the week, I'd play the same piece for the whole department, and I would play much better. So that was interesting. But I used to play terrible in his studio. And as a few years went by, I kind of started to realize, he never really says things to you like, will you just not play terrible? Or he doesn't say things like, well, if you kind of had an interpretation, maybe we could talk about it. Like, he always just went somewhere. And I would do things like, oh, well, I messed up and I know that's not very good and I'm working on it and all this stuff. And he just said, okay, great. Let's talk about this thing that he already had in mind, right? And then part of it for me was also getting teaching experience myself. And I thought, when you listen to students, you're listening really intently to them. You're not near as brilliant as your teacher. So one day I thought, imagine how he might be listening to you. And then I started to change my attitude. I thought, if that's true, then likely this is the case. No one will ever listen to me play like he is listening to me play for the rest of my life. If that's true, then I'm just wasting our time together by being nervous and insecure. And if that's true, then I totally need to change my mindset. And I changed it. And it changed pretty fast. And that room, his studio, that used to be the worst place that I played in the world, became one of the best. I would say second best outside of my own home, where like you're just super comfortable and the camera's off and all that. Because I just no longer cared. It doesn't mean I wouldn't make mistakes. I just wouldn't care about them. And I would think, he didn't care about it, so why do I? Also, if I can make this next sound really nice, like, he's gonna hear that. And he's gonna appreciate it. He is gonna know every little thing I'm doing, but also he's gonna know every little detail I put in there. And the better I got to know him, it was so obvious that was the stuff he was interested in. If I could come in and play a piece 100% perfectly, he would think it was cool, but he wasn't interested in that. Not that I could do that, but he was interested in the details that you could put in, right? So then, because I finally came to that realization, I feel like it helped me and him. He's passed away. He's no longer here. It helped me and him have some really special times together because I was thinking only of the most important things that I possibly could. And I just always assumed that's the mindset that he was always in. Extremely beneficial, right? And then I remind people, think about like if you have a teacher and you play for them. So the concept of anytime you play music, you could potentially change someone's life, right? Well, that doesn't apply to lessons though, right? Because your teacher, you play for them all the time and they hear you and they hear a lot of people. So it doesn't apply in there though, right? That doesn't make sense in there, right? No, also in there. And again, like my teacher, and like I do, who's going to listen to you like your teacher if you have a good one? The answer is nobody will. So why is that not a more important time to have that mindset than if you were playing for a general audience? I really can't think why not. And like I said earlier, sometimes I mention this to people, sometimes I don't. I mean, most of the time it kind of seems like it's not a good time to mention it, but occasionally I will say, here's what I felt about your playing. This was really nice, this was really nice, all these things are working really well. And I had to think that despite the fact that you were trying very hard to convince me otherwise. So quit. like do and say, think what you want. Don't try and convince me otherwise. I can make up my own opinion, right? And those of us that are like that, we're like thirsty, starving dogs. Like, give me something, give me anything. Maybe I can't do something with anything, but I will try. I'm looking for any opportunity. And when you take an instrument as versatile and as sensitive as the nylon string classical guitar, definitely chances are very high that something will come across that impacts you, that you can gravitate towards, and that you're just really glad you heard, and maybe could even potentially change your life.
you.